Well, what do you say? I think it's about time for another football Viking, Norse Viking analogy. Bud Grant's Minnesota Vikings, the teams of the 60s and 70s, used the sail. There were two ways to make an old Viking longship actually go somewhere, the oar and the sail. The sailors would row with oars in short-term, tactical situations in which they needed to maneuver and change directions very quickly. Occasionally, this was necessary in naval warfare, but more commonly they took to the oars along shorelines and through rivers, where navigation needed to be a lot more precise. But they'd also realized the same thing seafaring peoples around the world had spent the last couple thousand years figuring out. If you're gonna navigate the open seas, you probably better learn how to sail. The Viking longships were about as simple as they come in this regard, with a single square sail, and while they were very adept at working that sail to catch the winds at preferred angles, you can only be so precise. The winds might blow you northeast for a little while instead of north-northeast. You have to be okay with that. You have to let it happen. That's how the Norse got to Greenland, and that's how the Bud Grant Vikings reached those Super Bowls. Not by trying to brute force their way there, but by building a sturdy ship, rowing in spots when the wind died down, and mostly allowing the wind to do the work. Bud started training camp as late as possible, never barked orders, didn't give speeches, always clocked out at 5 or 6. He cast his lot with players many other coaches would have found too unorthodox or too eccentric or too smart. Rather than expecting all the winds to blow the same way, he leveraged and leaned into them. He let it happen. Ever since Bud left, though, the Vikings have been all oar, no sail, insisting on bearing down and maintaining precise beelines toward victory. You can see the points at which their arms just completely gave out. Les Steckel's boot camp era in '84, the 1990 fallout from the desperate Herschel Walker deal, the prolonged hangover in the wake of the 1998 Super Team. Afterward, they always refuse to drift where the winds are taking them. Instead, they immediately tool back up and grab the oars again in defiance of nature. This has produced some thrilling outcomes, and it's allowed them to expertly navigate the coastlines of the regular season as they've finished with winning records more consistently than pretty much anybody else. But in the uncharted territories of the open seas, this does not work. It has never worked. They row into the headwinds and it all goes to shit. It certainly has in 2010. Everything that clicked during the 2009 season, the one in which they were probably one catastrophic interception away from their first Super Bowl appearance in more than 3 decades, has stopped clicking this season. Prior to Week 5, Brett Favre turns 41 years old, which is usually great news unless you are a starting NFL quarterback. He has turned into a pumpkin. Last season, he threw for 33 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions. This year, racked with injuries, he throws just 11 touchdowns against 19 interceptions. In the early going, the front office had tried to help Favre out by adding a deep threat receiver. Our old friend Randy Moss, now 33 years old and fresh off 3+ years of hauling in touchdown passes from Tom Brady. It was an interesting pairing. Moss was an adept sailor, famously once saying that he played hard when he wanted to, with Favre, as hard a rower as there ever was, taking offense to that. This experiment doesn't even last a month. After the Vikings lose to the Patriots to fall to 2-5, Moss shows up to the post-game presser wearing a Red Sox hat and praising his old coach before criticizing his new coach, Brad Childress, who at this point is clinging to his job for dear life and decides that this is the time to make a power play. Childress bucks team procedure and gives Moss the boot without even bothering to tell owner Ziggy Wilf, which makes Wilf so angry that he reportedly considers nixing the move, keeping Moss, and firing Childress. By the time Week 14 rolls around, Minnesota is 5-7, Moss is gone, Childress has been fired mid-season. Favre is injured and will only throw 7 more passes before finally actually calling it a career. Once again, the Vikings' arms have completely given out, leaving them at the mercy of the wind. The evening before this Week 14 game against the Giants, the Fox Sports production crew leaves a camera rolling overnight in the Metrodome. This, as you guess, is something NFL broadcast crews never do, so I thought it'd be nice to take in the Metrodome as we never get to see it. The last decade here was perhaps the most relentlessly chaotic decade an NFL team has ever experienced. Now, as a new decade dawns, it is finally quiet. No cheering, booing, wailing, no sideline spats, no paper-thin secondaries giving away touchdowns like candy, no missed field goals. We should really take in this moment, because it's something we will never see again. Because the fucking roof caves in. Those winds we were talking about, well, They were blowing hard over Minneapolis last night, which made it too dangerous for workers to go up on the roof and clear out the snow that had built up, which is now causing the roof to collapse under the weight of said snow. The Vikings head to an alternate location and lose 21-3 to the Giants in Detroit en route to a 6-10 finish to the season. Congratulations to the Green Bay Packers, winners of Super Bowl 45, that is their 4th Super Bowl win. Congratulations to the New York Giants, winners of Super Bowl 46. That is their 4th Super Bowl win. In the meantime, the Vikings are awaiting their eventual move to a brand new stadium, which was in the works well before the roof collapse. Succeeding Brad Childress is the 8th head coach in franchise history, newly promoted defensive coordinator, Leslie Frazier. People love this guy. The media does, the players really do. He's a born motivator who has a gift for communicating optimism while remaining completely genuine, which is a pretty tough balancing act to pull off. In other words, Frazier is the right man for this moment. A man with a disposition to stand up and say the sky is not falling, even though it literally just did. This is about as low as this franchise has ever been. They sputtered to 3-13, easily their worst record since the Les Steckel season nearly 30 years prior. And in Week 16, somehow, it gets even worse.
On Christmas Eve of this miserable 2011 campaign, the Vikings are playing out the string. With just 6 quarters to go in the year, the finish line for this season to forget is in sight, at which time they can regroup and start fresh in 2012. And it's at this point that Adrian Peterson blows out his knee with multiple torn ligaments. Having occurred this late in the season, all of a sudden 2012 becomes a giant question mark for Peterson. Will he be in the lineup Week 1? At any point during the season? Will he ever again be able to recapture his old form? After the careers of superstar backs like Terrell Davis and Jamal Anderson were permanently derailed by their 1999 torn ACLs, it is reasonable to worry if Peterson will ever return to his pre-injury level of play. He doesn't. He wildly exceeds it. After the timing of his knee operation casts a dark cloud over the entire offseason, with the head trainer admitting in May the uncertainty, Frazier admitting during the preseason the uncertainty, and admitting as late as the lead-up to Week 1 the uncertainty. But Peterson has been unflinching that he won't miss it, and not only defies all odds by returning for the opening game, he puts together a season in 2012 that makes it look like he'd previously been running in sand his whole career.
There's a reason why every football fan knows exactly what an anterior cruciate ligament is. It's the ligament in the knee that allows a running back like Adrian Peterson to do the things he does, planting and cutting and changing directions to navigate the labyrinth of the modern NFL defense, one in which passageways open and close at random. NFL history is rife with terribly sad stories of players, particularly running backs, who are never really the same after an ACL tear. Many haven't made it back at all. Here we have 10 of Peterson's peers, Pro Bowl running backs who came back from torn ACLs and subsequent surgeries. Their rushing yards in their first season back are reflected here. Robert Smith, Terrell Davis, Deuce McAllister, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, Ronnie Brown, Edgerrin James, Jamal Anderson, Jamal Lewis, Jamal Charles. Those are names that jump off the page, elite-level guys who stood head and shoulders above the rest. Remember Peterson's historic game as a rookie when he broke the single-game rushing record by starting very slowly and then going just supernova in the second half? Well, we saw that in the micro, and now we're going to see that in the macro. Peterson starts modestly, rushing for about 80 yards per game over the first 6 of the season. Still, as you can see, very impressive for a guy coming off an ACL tear. You kind of forget he is coming off an ACL tear once you see his next 4 games. After 10, he's already passed 1,000 yards, and in game number 12 against Green Bay, he serves up a 210-yard performance inflated by this 82-yard score. No, this tackling is not what you would call good, but as you watch him swing these guys out of the way like saloon doors, you start wondering something that's more than a little bit crazy. Is he actually better than he used to be? In Game 13, he surpasses the season total of the great Jamal Charles, whose 2012 comeback season is happening concurrently, and with 3 games yet to play, he's already come back stronger from an ACL tear than any running back ever. Now, there's something you gotta understand about this. While most of the rest of these guys suffered their tears early in the season or the preseason, AP suffered his on Christmas Eve. All these other guys who delivered an even okay comeback performance had close to a year to recover. Peterson had 2 to 3 months less time. This is Wolverine stuff. So, having outclassed all his peers here, there's really nothing left to do but see how far he can climb up the overall single-season leaderboard. After 13 games, he's totaled 1,600 yards, good for 58th best ever up through 2022. In Game 14, he runs for 212 more, elevating him to number 22. After 15 games, he sits at nearly 1,900 yards, which puts him at number 10 with one game to play. This is a complete fairy tale as it stands, so you might not believe me when I tell you that in the final minute of this game, the Vikings and Packers are tied, and if the Vikings win, they're in the playoffs. Peterson has rushed for 173 yards to this point. He is about to take one last handoff. He needs 35 yards to break the all-time single-season rushing yards record of 2,105, set by Eric Dickerson in 1984. 35 yards. And guess where he is? The Packers' 37. If he runs for a touchdown here, he will simultaneously punch their playoff ticket with a game-winning touchdown and become the owner of one of football's most iconic records. The Packers have stonewalled Peterson his last two carries. They know exactly what's coming. A lane opens and AP sprints right through it before it shuts. He cuts left, then right, in so doing asking the world of his heroic left ACL. He does not do the impossible, but he comes stunningly close, ending his regular season with a 26-yard game to top out at 2,097. 8 yards short of the record. 8 months after a potential career-destroying injury. This is among the most exceptional athletic feats ever seen in any sport. He didn't even need to take the record to make the case for that. Although, the non-Vikings fans among us kinda wish that kicker Blair Walsh would miss this now very makeable field goal to send the game to overtime and give Peterson just a little bit more time.
But if there's anyone in the world you'd bet anything in the world wouldn't miss a sub-30-yard game-winning chip shot to keep his team's season alive, it is Blair Walsh. Walsh has an automatic, booming right leg that, immediately upon his arrival this year in the NFL, produced arguably the greatest kicking season that has ever before been seen. Starting with his first career game when he hit 3 fourth-quarter field goals, including a 55-yarder at the buzzer to force overtime where he nailed the game winner. Sure, we know all about Gary Anderson's 1998 regular season, and 2003 Mike Vanderjagt was also perfect, but those guys kicked 3 field goals of 50-plus yards in those 2 seasons combined. Walsh drilled 3 in 1 game as a Rook. And whereas most years not a single NFL kicker even tries 10 field goals from at least 50 yards out, Walsh not only attempted 10, he was perfect on all 10. And so of course on a little chippy, there is no drama from Walsh, who easily kicks the Vikings into another week of football.
Having secured a playoff spot with a win over the Green Bay Packers, the Vikings turn their focus to their opponent in the wildcard round, the Green Bay Packers again. Adrian Peterson, in spite of everything, has somehow managed to carry this otherwise mediocre Viking squad to the playoffs, but it's the quarterback who carries a team through the playoffs. And in this matchup, we find a useful illustration of the value of stability at that position. Let's run through the last 2 decades of the Minnesota Vikings quarterbacking history. In 1993, the Vikings starter behind center was Jim McMahon, with Sean Salisbury making some November starts. Warren Moon took over between 94 and 96, with Salisbury and Brad Johnson occasionally stepping in. Johnson assumed starting duties midway through 96 and held that title until Randall Cunningham's arrival in 97. Cunningham was great, then quickly gave way to Jeff George, who was also great, and who also quickly gave way. Dante Culpepper, of course, was great, and aside from some spot starts by Todd Bauman, Spurgeon Wynn, and Gus Farrat, provided remarkable stability at the position until his injury midway through 05. A returning Brad Johnson then started for the Vikings for the first time in 7 years. It was hoped that Tavares Jackson would be their quarterback of the future, but he struggled and split starts with Kelly Holcomb, Brooks Bollinger, and Farrat, who briefly took over for the first time in 5 years before the Vikings landed Brett Favre in 09. They finished out the 2010 season with him, Jackson, and Joe Webb before the reins were handed to Donovan McNabb in his final short stint before retirement, then to Christian Ponder, who's led them to the playoffs in 2012, but he's hurt. So today, it's back to Joe Webb. They're punched up here by their passer rating, higher is better, so here we see a 20-year period managed by 17 different quarterbacks of wildly varying abilities. Okay, now let's look at the last 2 decades of Green Bay Packers history at the quarterback position. Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, 2 starts from Matt Flynn. That's it. And you can tack an extra decade onto this if you want to. Aside from a few spot starts from backups, Rodgers will remain the Packers' starting quarterback until a trade to the Jets in 2023. So today, we'll see on display both the Packers' remarkable quarterback continuity in Aaron Rodgers and the Vikings' total lack thereof in Joe Webb. You know what? I'm going to speak off script here. That sounded really mean to Joe Webb as spoken out loud. Let me make it clear. I like Joe Webb. It's just, he's not Aaron Rodgers. Okay, continuing.
With the Vikings masquerading at quarterback a guy they drafted to play wideout and whose own college coach thinks is ill-equipped to play QB at this level, and whose running back is the league's most valuable player who rushed for over 400 yards in 2 regular season games against the Packers, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out Green Bay's defensive game plan. Predictably, Minnesota starts off by running the ball on each of the game's first 8 snaps, which gets them in range for a field goal in a 3-0 lead. Late in the first quarter, the Packers methodically put together a lengthy drive that ends with a touchdown, and while it quickly becomes clear that as a pocket passer Webb is in way over his head, at least that manifests itself in a fantastic second quarter goof when he sacks himself by tripping over pass rusher Clay Matthews, in the process dropping his net passing yardage to -3. With a minute and change left in the first half, and with Webb's net passing yardage still languishing in the sub-zero spectrum of the numeric system, the Vikes are down just 7, somehow threatening to keep the game tight entering halftime. But they're simply unable to slow down Webb's counterpart. Aaron Rodgers completes 3 passes for 59 yards in less than a minute to set up a short John Kuhn touchdown to go up 14 at the half, then to start the second half have little trouble reaching the red zone. Minnesota's defense is at least able to hold him to a field goal try before being stricken in their second consecutive playoff game with 12 men on the field at a horribly inopportune time. Can someone get these fellas an abacus? That hands the Packers a free first down, which in turn hands them another Kuhn touchdown when he takes a middle screen and helicopters his way to pay dirt. And with a replacement pseudo-quarterback under center for the Vikes, whose first 25 passes generate 61 yards and a pick, there is no chance of a miraculous comeback. Not against Aaron Rodgers with a guy under center whose play in this single game was so dreadful that it will serve as his swan song at the position.
After a 5-win season in 2013, Leslie Frazier loses his job, with his players sending him off with love and appreciation. The Vikings' defense was horrendous this year, allowing 30 points a game, but there was a hard cap on his potential regardless. For Frazier and the Vikings, job 1 on day 1 was to find a quarterback. Unless you have a truly terrifying defense like the Baltimore Ravens do, by the way, winners of Super Bowl 47, congratulations to them, you need a great quarterback to win a Super Bowl. Here we see every quarterback who's entered the league during the Super Bowl era and stuck around for at least a little while, plotted by the year they entered and their career passer rating. Over the first 3 decades, 2 outliers, the Niners' Joe Montana and Steve Young, really stick out here. It wasn't until 1998 when the era of the great quarterback began. This era was ushered in by Peyton Manning and Kurt Warner, which could not be more appropriate. Manning was a number 1 overall pick, Warner was an undrafted grocery store employee. Point being, you don't really know where the next great quarterback is going to come from. Many more legendary passers emerged in their wake: Brady, Breeze, Romo, Rivers, Roethlisberger, Rodgers. So many that a lot of outstandingly talented quarterbacks were relegated to the second tier. And then, somebody shut off the faucet. There's this 5-year period stretching from 2006 to 2010 in which very few quarterbacks really panned out. Then from 2011 on, as though nothing was ever wrong, the juice started flowing again. During these 5 years, though, the only truly remarkable quarterbacks to emerge were Matt Ryan and Stafford. It's easy to understand why an aging Brett Favre kept finding work. There were virtually no great young quarterbacks to go and get. Frazier and general manager Rick Spielman ended up casting their lot with Christian Ponder, who seemed like as good a bet as any. He did his best. They gave him plenty of time to develop. It just didn't work out. This void in quarterback talent is one of modern football's great mysteries. College quarterbacks were supposed to be more pro-ready than ever. Teams were supposed to be better at assessing talent than ever. No idea what happened here. But for coaches like Frazier, who were scrambling for solutions behind center, it meant that job 1 was just about impossible. Congratulations to the Seattle Seahawks, winners of Super Bowl 48. This is their first Super Bowl win. The 9th head coach in Vikings history is Mike Zimmer. Zimmer made his bones as a longtime defensive coordinator in Dallas and Cincinnati and has earned a reputation as a man who does not mince words and will brook no bullshit. Example: after 13 years on the Cowboys staff, Zimmer was hired away in 2007 by new Falcons coach Bobby Petrino. It was no small thing for him to pick up his career and move to Atlanta, but he did. And his reward was seeing himself, his fellow coaches, and his players get totally hung out to dry when Petrino, in one of NFL history's most infamous maneuvers, bailed before his first disastrous season was even over. He only left little laminated boilerplate notes as his goodbye to all the folks who'd uprooted their entire lives for him. Wouldn't even face him. Years later, Zimmer was still hot about it. When the subject of Petrino came up, he said, quote, "He's a gutless bastard. Quote that, I don't give a shit." A reporter cautioned that they probably wouldn't be able to print that line. Quote, "How about this? Gutless motherfucker." He probably made a couple million new Mike Zimmer fans that day. With a new era beginning, and with no doubt that Christian Ponder is not the answer at quarterback, general manager Rick Spielman looks to the draft in 2014. He sees many QBs on the board, from the extensively hyped Johnny Manziel to other notables like Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, and selects a linebacker, albeit a great one in Anthony Barr, who will be selected to 4 Pro Bowls. It appears the Vikings' endless wait for a franchise quarterback will continue. And then, toward the end of the night, Spielman deals for the final pick of the first round and selects my favorite football player. I thought it was appropriate to divulge that. This way, if any bias creeps in here, you know why. Listen, I'm a Chiefs fan. I have Patrick Mahomes sitting right there. And I probably don't need to tell you how much I love that man, but it's Teddy Bridgewater who I call my favorite player. There he is. His numbers paint him as a solid, serviceable quarterback with a ceiling as a mid-tier starter. And that's accurate. But just like the Minnesota Vikings, Teddy doesn't simply play football. He tells a story. He's earned 2 nicknames. The first is Teddy Icewater because even as a young quarterback, no matter the circumstances, he does not rattle. In fact, it's this tenacity that's earned him the blessing of the patron saint of Vikings quarterbacks himself, Fran Tarkenton. In 2012, he sustained a broken wrist and sprained ankle that kept him from starting Louisville's game against Rutgers. After watching his Cardinals fall into a 14-3 hole, he entered the game broken wrist and sprained ankle and everything. I really would have preferred that he not do that, but he did, and he made things tougher on himself by leading the Cards on long drives, meaning he constantly had to hobble himself up to the line. Late in the third, too hurt to scramble out of danger, steady Teddy stood tall in a collapsing pocket and floated this absolutely beautiful, perfectly placed drop in the bucket to take the lead. It was an all-time classic performance that helped catapult Louisville to the Sugar Bowl, where they entered as 14-point dogs against Florida. On Louisville's opening drive, the Gators' John Bostic led with his helmet and took Teddy's helmet clean off. It had no effect. He got right back up, led his Cards to a 24-3 advantage, and eventually secured a 33-23 upset that wasn't even that close. His second nickname is Teddy Two Gloves. Quarterbacks don't wear gloves, but Teddy does. As a high schooler, he switched back and forth from wide receiver to quarterback so often that he didn't have any time to take his gloves off. Louisville got a lot colder in the winter than his native Florida, so he decided to keep wearing them. As his draft stock rose, he got more attention and more scrutiny. It was decided that, on-field results be damned, his hands were too small. Although I don't think he ever said so, I wonder whether that's why he decided not to wear his gloves in front of scouts during Pro Day to prove he didn't need them. He was less comfortable and delivered a very disappointing performance that almost dropped him out of the first round entirely. Louisville fans were sad to see him miss out on the much larger signing bonus he would have received as a higher pick, but there was a silver lining. He landed with a franchise that actually had a history of consistently winning football games. That made us happy. During his rookie season, in fact, bars all over Louisville bought Sunday tickets so we wouldn't miss a single Vikings game. We became a Vikings town. That's how much Teddy meant to us. In 2014, Adrian Peterson pleads no contest to misdemeanor assault after injuring his son while administering corporal punishment. It's an awful thing. It's also an issue that's less simple and more deeply and generationally embedded than many acknowledge. Peterson's mother pleads for some degree of understanding for her son, explaining that it was an outcome of how he himself was raised. He avoids jail time but is suspended from the NFL for nearly the entire season. Minnesota's plans to bring their rookie quarterback along slowly are scrapped when starter Matt Castle breaks his foot. It's thought that a young quarterback's long-term prospects are better if he's allowed at least a year to become acclimated, but despite losing his top offensive playmaker, Teddy Bridgewater steps right into the fire and produces one of the most efficient campaigns ever seen from a rookie to this point. Finally, the Vikings have their guy. No more fretting over whether a young passer will ever work out, no more panning for gold with aging veterans. Across more than half a century of Vikings football, there have really only been 3 young quarterbacks who they ever felt they could build their future around. The first, of course, was Fran Tarkenton, whose falling out with Norm Van Brocklin robbed the franchise of the Hall of Famer for 5 crucial years, smack in the middle of their Super Bowl era. The second was Tommy Kramer, who showed promise but just could not stay on the field. The third was Dante Culpepper, who left after an injury and subsequent falling out. After nearly a decade of the Vikings wandering the wilderness under center, Coach Zimmer believes Teddy is the answer. A slightly improved 7-9 record is just the beginning of what fans hope will be a franchise first, a quarterback who, 10 years down the road, will still be their quarterback. Congratulations to the New England Patriots, winners of Super Bowl 49. This is their 4th Super Bowl win. In 2015, supported by a top 5 defense, Teddy leads Minnesota to an 11-5 record and an NFC North title. He even makes the Pro Bowl. He put up spectacular numbers this season, finishing with a passer rating of, okay, it looks like he tied for the 21st best passer rating in the NFL, and he was invited to the Pro Bowl because so many other quarterbacks just didn't feel like going and blew it off. Who cares? Teddy Bridgewater is a Pro Bowler, and that is that. This season, he refines his reputation as a low-ceiling, high-floor NFL quarterback. He produces relatively few highlights, but tends to keep his Vikings in the fight by throwing deliberately and taking care of the ball. He doesn't force it. In contemporary parlance, that earns him the derisive title of game manager, the type of conservative quarterback who won't lose you the game, but won't win you the game either. What I see, though, is a classic Minnesota Viking, a man with the foresight and quiet confidence to drop the oar and set sail. This confidence is about to meet an unprecedented test. In the 1960s and 70s, Bud Grant and the Vikings had assumed a superpower when they played in Minnesota. However material their advantage was or was not, they felt it, and they embraced it, banning heaters from the sidelines and wearing short sleeves. Here we see the recorded temperatures of all 11,668 NFL games played outdoors, for which there is weather data, including playoff games. Outdoor games hosted by the Vikings in Minnesota are in yellow. The coldest game ever played was the 1967 NFL Championship, known as the Ice Bowl, and while the Vikings didn't play in that one, they hosted many of the most extremely frigid games at home in Metropolitan Stadium. They disappear from this chart in 1982, when they moved under the Metrodome's roof. For nearly 30 years, not a single NFL game was played outdoors within the state of Minnesota. And then, Thor brought his hammer down, forcing the Vikings back out into the wilds. They played at the Gophers' nearby TCF Bank Stadium, an outdoor venue, as a temporary measure at first. When construction of their new stadium finally necessitated the demolition of the Metrodome, TCF became their official home in 2014 and 2015. Teddy Bridgewater is a Miami guy. Born there, raised there, played high school football there, almost played college ball there before switching to Louisville. Across his 2 seasons at TCF, he started 3 games that ranked among the coldest anywhere in the NFL. But wouldn't you know it, Tropical Teddy rose to the occasion. And not only did he win all 3, he put up good to great numbers. In the first round of the playoffs, the Vikings host the Seahawks at TCF. The temperature at kickoff, not including wind chill, is -6 degrees Fahrenheit and -21 Celsius. The wind chill is -25 degrees Fahrenheit, -32 Celsius. This will be the 3rd coldest game in NFL history, and the very coldest since the 1981 playoffs, well before Teddy was born. Not even the Bud Grant teams of the 60s and 70s faced a day like this one. Where are you right now, Bud? He's somewhere by a fireplace, I hope, watching the game on TV, bundled up, sipping a mug of hot chocolate. Safe to say he's earned it. But he's not there. He's here. Leading the Vikings onto the field for the opening coin toss in short sleeves. He is 88 years old. Bud will later explain that he decided to ditch his coat at the last minute, realizing that this is likely the final outdoor game the Minnesota Vikings will ever play. The last chance they'll ever have to claim this power.
As someone who hates the Seahawks with the fiery red passion of 1,000 suns, never in my life have I pulled harder for Minnesota. Like John, I am rooting my ass off for Teddy B today, a day in which I am experiencing life as a diehard Viking fan for the very first time. Solidarity with all you lifelong loyalists of the team on this one. Do not let me down, Vikings. With Adrian Peterson coming into the game as pretty clearly the best back in the league, and on a bone-chilling day that will make throwing the frozen ball a major struggle, he's the obvious focal point of Seattle's defense. After his first 3 carries combined for 1 yard, his fourth on 3rd and 1 loses 2, leading to a maddening 4th and short punt in no man's land that flips the field 23 whole yards. Their defense forces a 3 and out, and a low snap causes punter John Ryan to abort the mission and try to pick up the first down with his legs, only to get flipped in the air 3 yards short before landing straight on his face. Minnesota takes over, already in field goal range for star kicker Blair Walsh. But in negative 25-degree wind chill, longer kicks will be a challenge, so even though the Vikes don't finish off the drive with 6, they do move 25 yards to tee up Walsh for a chip shot field goal, which he of course hits as Minnesota scores the first and last points of the first half in a game where neither offense is able to competently operate in the Arctic conditions. The Vikings start the second half by intercepting Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson, with Trey Waynes taking the return close to midfield to set up another potential scoring opportunity. They're able to advance far enough into Seattle territory to at least give a field goal a chance, but this one is no chip shot. From 43 yards out, in what probably feels like 43 miles out in the deep freeze, Walsh is unfazed as he boots a laces-in kick right down the middle. After the defense gets a quick stop, Minnesota again gets the ball back in primo field position. They reach Seattle's 23, where on 3rd down, if they can't move the chains, they at least want to get a little closer for a field goal to shorten what would currently be another real tough try north of 40 yards. They instead lose 6 yards. On a near 50-yard attempt, Walsh couldn't be less intimidated, drilling what would be a successful field goal even if the uprights were separated by the width of a football. Through 3 quarters, he has scored every point in the game, including 2 incredibly difficult field goals that, at least for others, would be very low percentage. But not for Walsh, who has almost single-footedly given his team a 2-score advantage with 15 minutes to go against an offense that hasn't been able to do squat all day. And then, for a single play, in the most Vikings way imaginable, they allow their first explosive play. Seahawks center Patrick Lewis prematurely snaps the ball, sending it flying over the unexpecting Wilson's shoulder. Wilson corrals it to try and salvage the broken play, and with corner Captain Munnerlyn losing containment, easily evades him as he rolls right, notices the Vikings have completely lost track of rookie Tyler Lockett right in the middle of the field, and turns a potential huge loss or even turnover into a 35-yard gain down inside Minnesota's 5. 2 plays later, Seattle turns it into a 2-point game. On the ensuing Vikings drive, Bridgewater dumps a little 2nd and 5 pass to Peterson, who picks up a fresh set of downs with under 11 minutes to play, where they can continue methodically chewing up clock. But as we've seen, part of Peterson's greatness, a relentless refusal to concede a play as over even after picking up a crucial first down, also comes with a downside, and that downside can rear its ugly head at the worst of times, like right now. The Seahawks need a first down to reach field goal range, and they get it, but ultimately don't get much more, so they'll have to try a long kick of their own. And Walsh's counterpart is also up for the long attempt in harsh conditions, as Steven Hauschka has no problem driving through the go-ahead kick. After Minnesota's offense goes 3 and out, their defense is on the cusp of forcing the same fate for Seattle's when safety Andrew Sendejo comes excruciatingly close to doing them one better but can't hang on to make the 3rd down pick near midfield. Instead, the Seahawks are able to punt. Backed up deep in their own territory, so do the Vikings, where they are now in dire shape. With just over 2 minutes left, Seattle's one well-timed first down from nearly icing the game, but the Vikings D again steps up, forcing another 3 and out to give their offense one last chance to orchestrate a game-winning field goal drive for Walsh to boot home. On 2nd down, Bridgewater passes to Kyle Rudolph for the first time all game, and he draws a pass interference on Chancellor that advances the ball to Seattle's 42. Eking out one more first down would give Walsh a chance to make a difficult field goal to send the Vikes to the divisional round. And on the next play, Bridgewater realizes he likes picking at the Rudolph-Chancellor matchup, and his tight end validates him by hauling in a pass that will be close to eking out that first down, before shaking free of Chancellor and leaving him in the dust while barely breaking stride to blow way past difficult field goal range and into intermediate field goal range. Peterson then carries 3 times for 9 yards to come up just shy of a first, but who cares? He's moved him past intermediate field goal range and into chip shot range. Time for Walsh, who scored every point for his team today, to put his stamp on this classic with a playoff game winner that will cement his heroic place in Vikings lore. We know all about how incredible Walsh's rookie season was, but what about this year? Well, this year he's perfect. At home, anyway. After his 3 successful field goals today, he's attempted 17 kicks here at TCF Bank Stadium this season. Plenty of chip shots, 50-yarders, and everything in between. Doesn't matter. Even in the Minnesota elements, he has split the uprights each and every time. Having already hit twice, right down the middle from well over 40 yards, he now lines up for a kick from 27 yards out. Kevin McDermott snaps the ball, Jeff Locke holds it, and Blair Walsh.
And the kick is no good!
After 4 hours of sitting in weather that feels like dozens of degrees below zero, this is how the 52,000 Minnesotans in attendance have to see it end. Adrian Peterson insists he take the blame, reasoning that if he'd never fumbled, Seattle never would have kicked their go-ahead and ultimately game-winning field goal. As for Minnesota's fateful field goal, McDermott tries to take the blame. Jeff Locke, whose hold left Walsh staring at laces for the second time today, also tries to take the blame, but Walsh is having none of it. He owns the mishap, explaining he simply put a bad swing on it and that he cannot let that happen. No one else, he insists, deserves any blame whatsoever.
Congratulations to the Denver Broncos, winners of Super Bowl 50. This is their 3rd Super Bowl win. This ends Adrian Peterson's final full season in a Vikings uniform. After an injury wipes out most of his 2016, he'll finish out his career with a few other teams. As of July 2023, he hasn't yet officially retired, but whenever he does, he'll do so as one of the very greatest running backs of all time. Teddy Bridgewater will never complete another pass as a Minnesota Viking. The following summer in training camp, he takes a snap and drops back to throw. It's the most normal thing you can imagine. He immediately hits the ground. A non-contact injury is a player's worst nightmare, and this one is the nightmare of nightmares. It's as though his knee exploded. There's no helping him to the sideline, no sending him inside to get an x-ray. They immediately call 911 to send an ambulance. There are very real, very founded concerns that they're going to be forced to amputate his leg. His surgeon likens it to a war wound, remarking, quote, "There's nothing there." Using his mother's recovery from breast cancer as an inspiration, he spends an unimaginable 1.5 years rebuilding and rehabbing his knee, until incredibly, he's declared ready to play again. Many of us who love Teddy as fans are terrified by this prospect. At this point, all we wanted was for him to be healthy and happy and never have to experience something that traumatic ever again. But I think we were all a lot more scared than Teddy Icewater himself, who resurrects his career with a whisper-quiet relentlessness. In 2018, 2 years after his injury, Teddy signs with the Jets, and in his brief time there wins over the fans with an excellent training camp. His value skyrockets, he's traded to the Saints and wins over the fans there in 2019 when, following an injury to starter Drew Brees, he steps in and goes a perfect 5-0. After that, he wins over discerning fans all across America, becoming a sort of hybrid between low-tier starter and high-tier backup. And we're happy to break in with some late-breaking news here. On August 10th, the Lions have signed Teddy Bridgewater to be their backup quarterback. Enjoy him, Detroit. Teddy Bridgewater has completely subverted the negative connotation that surrounds the term journeyman quarterback. He's the substitute teacher everybody loves. He's not merely a short-term solution or second option. He is America's all-time quarterback. As for Blair Walsh, whose outstanding career should not be defined by one miss, there's no point in showing you any charts, not unless you feel like staring at a single dot. As far as we can tell, no one has ever missed a must-have field goal from that close in the last 2 minutes of a playoff game. This was a final farewell to the Vikings from the Minnesota Cold. This team once embraced it, but even then, it was never the kicker's friend. Fred Cox, who missed his share of crucial field goals in the 70s, was among the first to learn this, and Blair Walsh might be the last. The Wilfs originally intended for the brand new US Bank Stadium, which the Vikings moved into in 2016 to feature a retractable roof, but it was eventually decided to be too expensive, thereby making it likely that the Vikings will never play outdoors in Minnesota again. The new stadium's architecture is accurately described as aggressive, a symbol of unshakable capital and power. This $1 billion building looks pretty cool. It also sits in the middle of the Mississippi Flyway, a major migration route for birds who aren't able to see the reflective glass that makes up large portions of its exterior. Birds die constantly here, probably several hundred per year if you count all the poor little fellas who initially survive impact but die soon after. It's been pointed out that changes could be made to the glass that would save a vast majority of birds from this fate. As far back as 2012, before they even broke ground, conservationists advocated for bird-safe glass. A full couple of years later, the Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority said, wouldn't you know it, we just ordered different glass. Too late now. Conservationists have continued their efforts, arguing recently that changes could be made to the glass that would save a lot of birds while still remaining subtle enough that most people wouldn't even notice. In 2023, as the MSFA met over a possible $280 million in stadium upkeep, bird-safe glass, which is estimated to cost somewhere around 1/3 of 1% of that, was once again lobbied for. No response. This avicidal menace, proudly brought to you by your friends at US Bank, is going to keep on offing birds by the hundreds, racking up astounding body counts year after year after year, and they're fine with it. It just doesn't matter. There isn't a buck in it, so they don't care. No one can make them. The end. It's things like this that make you want to throw up your hands, give up on changing anything, and just watch the damn game. I've been guilty of that. But remember when we talked about the Super Bowl's evolution into culture-swallowing superpower? When I noted that the only marches capable of shutting down any major city in America are marches that celebrated championships? It's around this point in history when that changes. In the Twin Cities, it starts with the WNBA's Minnesota Lynx. In 2016, after Philando Castile is killed by police in a St. Paul suburb, Lynx players hold a pre-game press conference to denounce racial profiling and then wear shirts honoring Castile and Alton Sterling during warm-ups. In response, 4 off-duty officers working the game walk out in protest. Maya Moore, Simone Augustus, Lindsay Whalen, Rebecca Brunson, and head coach Cheryl Reeve get about the reaction you'd expect from some corners. They earn far less than a typical Vikings player. They have far more to lose. But in the NFL, protesting or making any sort of organized gesture just isn't what you do. The NFL, in some counterintuitive sense, isn't part of this world, and that's the point. It's the refuge from this world, the replacement for it, the theater in which the terms of conflict are as easy to understand as they can possibly be. And you're almost guaranteed a winner cut and dry right then and there with comparatively very little to feel guilty about at the end of it. Which is part of the reason why so many are caught on their heels when the 49ers' Colin Kaepernick responds to the deaths of Castile and others with his silent anthem protest just a short time later. The bubble separating the NFL's entertainment product from the real world has burst. People aren't ready. All the usual suspects kick and scream like babies about it, but even some of those we would expect to be ready are not ready. Bud Grant is not ready. He's trash, Bud says of Kaepernick. Fans who are only familiar with the broad strokes of the man's legacy might say, well, he's the guy who made his players line up to face the flag during the anthem. That adds up. That probably does explain his initial reaction. But this is a man who himself bucked authority when something wasn't right, who championed the individuality of his players, who was in his own quiet way one of the great pioneers of racial progress in the NFL. And that probably explains his later comments, in which he walks back what he said to a considerable degree. He seems to have been hung up on the flag piece of it. Ultimately, he says it still makes him uncomfortable, but seems to acknowledge that's in fact part of the point and recognizes that people like Kaepernick are onto something a lot greater. In 2020, when George Floyd is murdered by Minneapolis police, streets all over the country fill up with people. It's unlike anything people my age have ever seen. A spectacle that was, until now, reserved for games 4, 5, 6, 7, or the Super Bowl was now dedicated to the value of human life. It made people like me take a long, hard look at the casual defeatism I'd adopted for so long. Something similar seems to have happened within Vikings Pro Bowl linebacker Eric Kendricks, who'd noticed when the Lynx put themselves out there and feels like it's past time for the NFL to catch up. It starts, granted, on Twitter. A piece of carefully crafted PR messaging is pushed out by the NFL, which represents the owners, who very obviously shut Kaepernick out of the league because they were scared of how signing him would affect the bottom line, which a former NFL exec will later attest to. Kendricks pushes back, hard. He'll later explain that it isn't really the NFL he's trying to push here, it's himself. On top of being an NFL player, he's typically a pretty low-profile guy. Putting himself out there like this is not his place, but he decides it should be. It works. Before long, Kendricks is meeting with community leaders, advocating for a reform of a fundamentally cruel bail system and slashing and redirecting police budgets, stuff we would have been stunned to hear from an NFL player up until this moment. Kendricks and his teammates contribute substantially to a citywide surge of political momentum that culminates in an absolute stunner. The Minneapolis City Council votes to forward a proposal allowing for the dismantling of the police department. What does that mean? Most of us on the outside looking in astonishment don't completely know. Does it happen? No, it doesn't. Did it stand a real chance? It probably didn't. But even advances this small and ultimately unsuccessful expand the boundaries of what people believe is on the table. Meanwhile, the NFL, tasking itself with a very simple and straightforward mission to end racism, responds exactly how Lieutenant Commander Data would. It's what you get when an institution of human beings gets larger and larger and more powerful and less accountable to anybody until it collectivizes into something that is no longer human. But these people, they are. Nothing has been able to break this bond, and I'm not sure anything ever will. As exhausting as it sometimes can be for us, they are the ones we love. And exhausting as it can often be for them, the ones who quite often love us back. It's a love that, then, now, and always, transcends everything else. Congratulations to the New England Patriots, winners of Super Bowl 51. This is their 5th Super Bowl win. On the field for the Vikings, 2016 was a very better things aren't possible kind of year. Teddy Bridgewater's injury crushed their dreams of finally moving forward with a franchise quarterback for the long haul and sent them diving into the same grab bag they've spent most of the last quarter century swimming in. This time they came up with Sam Bradford, who, thanks to a slate of injuries that have followed him throughout most of his football life, has never really come close to living up to the expectations he'd earned after being drafted first overall in 2010. Nonetheless, he does have a pretty good year and helps lead the Vikings to a 5-0 start. Once again, though, we find ourselves in reruns. If you start 5-0 in the 16-game era, you stand a very solid chance of reaching the Super Bowl, you're likely to make a deep playoff run, and you are a virtual lock to at least make the playoffs. These Vikings do not make the playoffs, just like they didn't in 2003, meaning that they are the only franchise in this era to start 5-0 and miss the playoffs in multiple seasons. It was a hell of a run. For about 20 years there, we had heroes. Real compelling heroes we could believe in. Cunningham, Moss, Culpepper, Peterson, Bridgewater. They're all gone, with Peterson having left for New Orleans and Teddy stuck on the sidelines as he prepares to head elsewhere. Entering 2017, the great storytellers of football seem as though they've finally, after all these decades, run out of stories to tell.
Sam Bradford, with the benefit of an entire offseason in Minnesota, plays the best game of his career in a rousing win over the Saints to open the 2017 season. But in the immediate aftermath of his Player of the Week performance, his troublesome left knee that's twice endured torn ACLs begins flaring up and he misses the next 3 games. In steps journeyman Case Keenum, and the team loses 2 of his 3 starts before Bradford returns to the lineup in Week 5. But he shouldn't have. Clearly hampered by the ailing knee, Bradford is basically a sitting duck in the pocket, and after 15 dropbacks combined to produce 1 yard, he's mercifully pulled for Keenum shortly before halftime. Keenum's efficient second-half play helps topple the Bears, and it never stops as he remains their starter the rest of the way. After re-entering the lineup, his passer rating north of 99 is among the very best in the NFL, better than even league MVP Tom Brady, as he guides the Vikes to victory in 11 of their final 12 games. Sparking Keenum's out-of-nowhere success is perhaps the NFL's best wide receiver duo, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Thielen's a Minnesota native who spent each of his 27 years of life in the Gopher State. He grew up with a deep love for the Vikings and the heroics of their wideouts and played collegiately at Division II Minnesota State, the lone school to offer him a scholarship. Undrafted in 2013, Thielen tried out for the Vikings and wound up latching on before being let go and signed to the practice squad where he spent his first season. Then when Mike Zimmer took over, Thielen was able to make the active roster for the first 2 years of his regime, though he was buried on the depth chart. Finally, last year in 2016, he became a full-time starter and a highly productive one at that to earn himself a lucrative new deal. Having already blown way past the wildest expectations that could be placed on an undrafted free agent, this season he breaks out even further, posting more receiving yards than any other player in his conference except Julio Jones. Diggs is also a success story in his young career, with the 2015 fifth-round pick out of Maryland a healthy scratch in each of the first 3 weeks of his rookie season, then, immediately upon getting his first chance to play, making that decision look dumb as hell. He flourished to the tune of 419 receiving yards through 4 career games when, since 1985, no one else except Anquan Boldin has reached even 350 so quickly. This year, he compliments Thielen as one of the league's top number 2 wideouts, and combined with the number 1 defense, the pieces fall perfectly into place in Minnesota's second ever 13-win season.
Okay, a playoff trip and a first-round bye. Maybe they do have another story to tell after all. Gotta hand it to you, fellas. You sure know how to line them up. This is easily the strongest Viking squad since the 2009 team that came within one bad throw of the Super Bowl. That Brett Favre interception certainly served as the hinge point, but it seems quite likely that the 3-hour gauntlet that led up to it informed his decision not to simply slide and pick up a few yards. The bounty that some in the Saints organization had placed on Favre and others resulted in enormous penalties in the form of suspensions, lost draft picks, and a $500,000 fine, but the one thing they couldn't take away was their one and only Super Bowl trophy. For them, it was all worth it. The Vikings haven't won a playoff game since. Among those receiving suspensions was head coach Sean Payton, who'd actually began building his reputation as a Viking killer many years prior while serving as the Giants' offensive coordinator. It was he who shifted tactics to target Richard Solomon's threadbare defensive backs unit and helped deliver a stunning 41-zip victory that the Vikings of the Randy Moss era never really recovered from. In the wake of the 2009 win, the league found that although Payton didn't introduce or manage the bounty program, he looked the other way upon learning of the allegations, apparently content to remain willfully ignorant. After sitting out the 2012 season, he stepped right back on the sideline, and that's where he is today, staring right back at these Minnesota Vikings as though none of it had ever happened at all.
Payton's offense is a lethal unit, with Drew Brees being given the league's most dynamic backfield, not 1 but 2 Pro Bowl tailbacks, in an almost unfair proposition for defenses. But not Minnesota's, as the Vikes get off to a torrid start. They quickly usher Brees off the field to open the game, and the offense marches into the red zone where running back Jerick McKinnon takes a toss and jets to the outside and through a massive alley for an easy score. After a second Saints punt, some handsiness from corner Ken Crawley gets flagged, and then on the very next snap, another flag on some dubious Crawley contact results in 54 yards worth of interference penalties. That gifts Minnesota a field goal, which feels like plenty with the way their defense is playing. The next 2 times their D's on the field, they force a Saints 3-and-out, then, when Brees underthrows a deep post, an interception. Brees, who in the regular season completed 72% of his passes to break the 1-year-old single-season completion percentage record set by Sam Bradford in his first year in Minnesota, closes the first quarter having completed but a lone 3-yard pass in 6 attempts with that pick. Keenum capitalizes on the takeaway to lead the Vikes inside the Saints' 5, where on second down, safety Marcus Williams gets overly physical with Stephon Diggs, with the PI moving the ball to the 1. Latavius Murray plunges in from there to go up 3 scores. The Saints' offense can't be smothered forever though, and they finally stack together some first downs to reach the red zone. It seems inevitable they'll score a touchdown to get right back in the game, but D-end Everson Griffin's spectacular no-look deflection pops the ball high in the air where Anthony Barr comes away with it to preserve their 17-0 lead at the half. For their second consecutive playoff game, the Vikings pitch a shutout for more than 70% of the game before New Orleans finally gets on the board when Breeze looks for Michael Thomas on a crosser and places the ball beyond the outstretched arm of a diving Xavier Rhodes to cut their deficit to 10 with 16 minutes left. Shades of somehow again still losing intensify on the very next play. Keenum, with a lineman hanging on him, recklessly throws an up-for-grabs pass off his back foot in the general direction of Diggs, but which is ultimately a can of corn for Marcus Williams to make a game-changing play. New Orleans cashes that in with another Thomas touchdown a couple minutes into the fourth quarter in a game that's all of a sudden a 3-point squeaker. Thanks to Keenum bouncing back with an absolutely gorgeous, perfectly placed rainbow to Jarius Wright, the Vikes get enough to kick a field goal, but they're still extremely vulnerable to a Saints touchdown. Sean Payton dials up some third down trickery to go and get it, which it might well have done if not for a barely overthrown Willie Snead pass that instead caps a 3-and-out. The Vikings have to punt it back, but George Johnson gets a piece of the ball to set New Orleans up on Minnesota's 40 with 5 minutes to play in regulation. Breeze manages to throw a dart right through a linebacker's hand to pick up 15, and a few plays later on another perfect pass to Alvin Kamara, New Orleans indeed scores that touchdown. The Vikings have officially completed their squandering of a late third quarter 3-score lead. Now playing from behind, they do at least have 3 minutes on the clock to try and move about 40 yards to give Kai Forbath a chance at a long, game-winning field goal. But Keenum repeats his inexcusable mistake from earlier in the game, heaving another up-for-grabs prayer off his back foot toward Adam Thielen. Thielen, however, overcomes the ultra-rare hold before the pass is thrown, interference after the pass is thrown, double whammy to still make the jaw-dropping catch and earn those on-the-ground ass slaps. Thanks to his heroics, Minnesota reaches long-distance field goal range, and after Marcus Williams breaks up another risky Keenum pass, it's time to call on Kai Forbath with a minute and a half left. All these Vikings fans bear scars from the fresh memories of losing home playoff games in the wake of superstar kickers pulling chip shots wide left. Now Forbath, a roughly league-average kicker, lines up for an immensely difficult, pressure-packed, 53-yard field goal with a berth in the NFC Championship game on the line and drills it right down the middle.
Got it!
Not quite celebration time, but it's getting damn close. They still have to make one last stop of one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, which, after 2 completions move the Saints into Minnesota territory, is easier said than done. But then they start doing it. 3 straight incompletions intended for Michael Thomas bring up 4th and 10 for the game. And Breeze delivers a pinpoint pass to convert as the Saints enter field goal range. 3 more plays generate 8 more yards to bring up a very manageable 43-yard field goal attempt, and Will Lutz hammers it through as the Viking fanbase endures the all-too-familiar crush of devastating last-second postseason defeat. After 3 lead changes in 2.5 minutes, the less than half minute on the clock and only 1 timeout in their pocket are a slight impediment to the Vikings if they want to entertain dreams of a 4th. Oh good, everyone moves without the ball being snapped. Let's back up 5 yards because we're not in a big enough hole. Keenum's then able to hit Diggs for 19 yards, but they have to use their final timeout, and with just 18 seconds left, maybe enough for 3 or 4 plays, they're still over 20 yards away from giving Forbath a chance at even a career-long field goal. Keenum throws incomplete on 1st down and again on 2nd to bring up 3rd down with 10 seconds remaining.
These oars never stop cutting into the sea. They haven't for more than half a century. There is no rest here. In these 57 years, how many moments of pure catharsis have the Minnesota Vikings experienced? Not just a win, not just a big win, but a full exhalation, a casting out of the demons. I count 2. The miracle at the Met in 1980 and the 1998 Thanksgiving game against the Cowboys, in which Randall and Randy buried the Cowboys' Super Bowl age by throwing him a shovel and making him dig. Those were both regular season games. The postseason is where they suffer, and that suffering never seems to take the same form twice. They get sucker punched by up-and-comers they're supposed to bulldoze. They lose on freak occurrences and bad calls and injuries that won't heal. They lose when they're preordained to win. When their opponent appears doomed, they simply defeat themselves. They faceplant into blowouts of unthinkable margins. Very rarely does it ever seem at the outset like they're fated to lose. They just do. If you're a Vikings fan, this team may never make it up to you. They might not ever balance the books. They may, until the end of time, take more than they can ever give you. But if you wait long enough, they will give you something. Of all people, Mr. Disgusting Act himself, Fox play-by-play man Joe Buck, is in the booth, patiently waiting to declare time of death. This, however, is not a camera from the Fox broadcast. It's operated in-house, and it sits by the far end zone, the shores of playoff victory and spiritual triumph. A far-flung continent the Vikings seem to only ever hear about. Impossibly distant and unreachable.
Keenum steps into it. Pass is caught. Diggs! Touchdown! Vikings win
That angle of the play allows us to experience God's lightning and hear God's thunder. Whether you're a fan of the Vikings or not, it is from this point forward the footage you want to watch at the end of every bad day. And it's a reminder that this lightning still strikes our world. It does not, however, paint a very clear picture of how and why exactly one of football history's most shocking events ever came to be. For that, let's go to the broadcast cameras.
Stefon Diggs runs an outbreaking route far enough downfield to theoretically set up a long field goal try if he can get out of bounds, but he's not close enough to the boundary, and so Marcus Williams is in perfect position to simply allow the completion and make a game-ending tackle of Diggs in bounds. But Williams inexplicably completely whiffs, launching himself not into Diggs, but to the left of Diggs. On top of that, Williams takes out trailing teammate Ken Crawley, preventing him from any chance at making a play on Diggs. If there were any other Saint aligned deep on that side of the field, that too would force Diggs to step out of bounds and pray to the heavens that this time a field goal will work out. But there's not. Diggs instead has a clean runway to the end zone in a breathtaking Minneapolis miracle that marks the sweetest revenge after their bitter NFC Championship bounty gate loss to Peyton Saints 8 years ago.
Vikings fans will continue to sail on this wind for years and years. In fact, the outcome of next Sunday's game does nothing but demonstrate how powerful of a moment the Minneapolis miracle really was. Let's look back once again to 2000, when the Vikings charged into the NFC Championship game with years of momentum and staggered off wearing a 41-0 obliteration that was so demoralizing that it seemed to strip an entire organization of its will to fight. It was easily one of the most damaging individual losses a team has ever suffered. Well, 17 years later, the Vikings wander into the Link, where the Philadelphia Eagles hand them a loss that's just about as bad. Once again, Minnesota's secondary gets expertly carved up by someone unexpected, this time journeyman backup Nick Foles, who throws for 3 touchdowns and more than 350 yards. An additional, uniquely tragic element of this loss is that US Bank Stadium is going to be the site of Super Bowl 52, meaning the Vikings were one win away from becoming the first team in NFL history to play a Super Bowl in their own stadium. Instead, the Eagles ride this 38-7 clobbering to a subsequent Super Bowl 52 win. This is their first. Congratulations to them. This loss should crush the Vikings and their fans. And yet, somewhere outside Minneapolis, the Grinch is peering from a mountaintop, furious that these people are still happy. It was their first dramatic win in a high-stakes game since the miracle at the Met 37 years prior. It was a moment of such profound catharsis that it couldn't be blunted by anything that came after it. Not even a loss like that one. Stefon Diggs, of course, is among those of us too young to remember the miracle at the Met. He's only been here 3 years. But he has inherited this story. He feels its weight. After running in one of the most iconic touchdowns of all time, Diggs gives ESPN's Josina Anderson the standard glory to God stuff for as long as he can hold it in.
All I can say is give it to God, because without him, nothing nothing is possible, and I wouldn't be here, so.
Okay, that's about as long as he can hold it in.
Damn, that shit feel good.
Did it ever? It's 2018. This is Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins. I don't like him. I mean that strictly within the fan-player dynamic, I should clarify. He's without question a person of exceptional talent. He seems like a good guy. Even when he says something I don't like, it never sounds like it comes from a bad place. I wish him happiness. So, why do I as a fan dislike Cousins as a player? Even then, as of 2018, no good reason. One of the more embarrassing things about being a sports fan is that once in a while you find yourself saying something about an athlete that you would never say to their face. I was a big fan of Robert Griffin III, and when he was drafted, I didn't like Washington drafting another quarterback in Cousins behind him. I was a big fan of Case Keenum, and I wish the Vikings had stuck with him instead of offering the largest guaranteed contract ever offered to Cousins. But in what universe is either of those things Kirk's fault? One time he posted some terrible looking steaks he purported to have grilled on Instagram that looked like he was trying to give him a suntan, but ultimately, who cares? I didn't have to eat him. In one of the very first things he says in the 2023 Netflix docuseries Quarterback, he shares a quote that's inspired him from Margaret Thatcher. But he probably doesn't know who Margaret Thatcher is. I'm sure he just read it on a throw pillow or something. Behind center, he typically plays quarterback like he's manning a guard tower, with a commitment to staying in the pocket that's gone way out of style. A scouting report that's not too terribly different from that of Teddy Bridgewater, my favorite player. See what I mean? I do have reasons, it's just that none of them are good. In other words, I'm a hater. It's an embarrassing thing to be. Maybe we would all benefit from a more objective assessment.
Despite the record-breaking deal, their new quarterback carries with him a reputation as someone who shrinks in primetime. The biggest evidence to support this is that Washington lost each of their 6 Monday night games with Cousins at the helm, never mind the fact that he had a passer rating north of 100 in 4 of them. When he's well protected with time to go through his progressions, he's accurate enough to slice up defenses, and though certainly not a top 5 quarterback capable of carrying a mediocre team to a championship, he's clearly an above average passer, and with a strong enough supporting cast, who knows what could happen in January. Their first chance at seeing comes in Season 2, when Zimmer's top 5 defense complements Cousins in a 10-win 2019 campaign. After a wildcard upset win in New Orleans, they travel to the Bay Area for a divisional round showdown with the Niners. The Vikings allow an early touchdown, but respond nicely with a drive culminating in a Stephon Diggs 41-yard score. And then immediately afterward, for a period spanning more than 3 quarters, their offense goes almost inconceivably cold. Their next 7 possessions combine to generate 8 net yards, good for an average of about 1 foot per play and 41 inches per series. Outside of their touchdown drive, they pick up just 1 first down all game until garbage time. Meanwhile, defensively, they can't stop San Francisco from running the ball down their throat all game long, and the Vikings really never even put up a fight in a meek 27-10 loss.
Congratulations to the New England Patriots, winners of Super Bowl 53. This is their 6th Super Bowl win, tying them with the Steelers for the most by any one franchise. Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs, winners of Super Bowl 54. This is their 2nd Super Bowl win. I waited my entire life to see this one, and let me tell you something. It is everything you think it will be. One reason I found Fran Tarkenton to be such a compelling and sympathetic figure was his reputation as a quarterback who, it was said, can't win the big one. In a sense, both Tarkenton and Cousins are men outside their time. Tark was exceptionally mobile in an era when he was supposed to stay put. Cousins is the very definition of a pocket passer in an era when quarterbacks have reinvented the position with their mobility. And wouldn't you know it, what's old is new again. This might soon change, though, because while Kirk Cousins has been blessed with a talented receiving core, he's about to link up with a caliber of wide receiver that he has never seen before. In many respects, none of us have.
After having grown disenchanted with his run-heavy offense that's resulted in a sharp reduction in targets, combined with a slow start to that 2019 season from Kirk Cousins, Stefon Diggs' frustration boiled over after a Week 4 loss in Chicago, and he skipped meetings and practices the first half of the following week, earning a $200,000 fine. Though the Vikings resisted trading him during the season, when the offseason rolls around, the team decides Diggs' time in Minnesota has run its course and they ship him to Buffalo for a package headlined by a first-round pick in the 2020 draft. They move on from an established, dynamic 26-year-old receiver for a lottery ticket. And they hit the jackpot. Justin Jefferson, who closed his collegiate career with nearly 450 receiving yards across back-to-back-to-back wins over top 4 teams to win a national championship, has been bypassed 21 times, much to the delight of the Minnesota Vikings, who thank God have no issues this time properly navigating the rigorous complexities of submitting a name to be drafted and bring aboard the dazzling LSU wideout.
This guy is so cool. He puts incredible moves on coverage, he's going to stack up monster numbers, he's going to produce 10 minutes of highlights a year, he's even got his signature dance ready to go on day one. It's called the Gritty, named for its creator, Allen Gritty Davis. Davis passed it on to his friend, receiver Jamar Chase, who brought it to LSU, where Jefferson picked it up as well. It explodes in popularity when Chase and Jefferson bring it to the NFL. Jefferson, in fact, wastes no time, gritting across the line to christen his first career touchdown. He couldn't even wait until he got into the end zone. In him and in Cousins, we see another storytelling device from the Vikings, the callback. The 2 signature on-field characters throughout their history have been Fran Tarkenton and Randy Moss. Those 2, of course, never played together, but if Cousins, the snake-bitten quarterback with a playing style from another era, is the new Tarkenton, then Jefferson, the superhumanly talented wide receiver who radiates fun, is the new Moss. It's a new day, a new decade. Kirk Cousins rings it in by saying some ignorant shit about COVID. On Kyle Brandt's podcast, he says, quote, "If I die, I die." He thinks it's pointless for him to wear a mask and explains that he personally is taking a, quote, "survival of the fittest approach toward the virus," which on his face sounds like about the most stone-hearted thing you could possibly say, but I'm positive that's not what he meant. He later clarifies that protective measures are worthwhile for other people and he's wearing a mask out of respect for them. He just isn't worried about the prospect of he himself getting it because the Lord has a plan for him. You'll see where we're going with this a little bit later. I'm not interested in just being a recreational, time-traveling COVID scold. Few of us were at our best in 2020. I mean, hey, I was scrubbing down bags of potato chips with sanitary wipes. I watched the NBA Horse Challenge on purpose. I sat down and turned on the TV and watched it. Maybe with the benefit of hindsight, we can offer each other just a little bit of grace. After all, he is wearing a mask. Great. Now let's watch our new friend Justin rack up some incredible numbers.
Justin Jefferson in 2020 tops 100 receiving yards in 7 games, the most by any rookie in the Super Bowl era. In fact, no one other than fellow LSU alum Odell Beckham Jr. has even had 6. It helps Jefferson become the first rookie in this era to catch 1,400 yards worth of passes, though 1 year later, upon the expansion of the NFL schedule from 16 games to 17, he'll be joined by fellow LSU teammate Jamar Chase. When not taking advantage of the luxury of throwing the ball to Jefferson and the ever-consistent Adam Thielen, Cousins has the luxury of handing the ball to the man who's easily the NFC's best running back, Dalvin Cook. Cook is by far the class of his conference, rushing for over 40% more yardage than the runner-up. And even though one of my favorite parts of every NFL season is not playing fantasy football, he had a 2-game stretch in November that, by using fantasy points as a basic statistical catch-all formula, was the 4th most prolific ever seen going back to at least the merger. But despite all that offensive firepower, the defense backslides from one of the league's best to one of the league's worst, and the Vikings finish a disappointing 7-9.
Congratulations to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, winners of Super Bowl 55. This is their 2nd Super Bowl win. And here we see something pretty funny. They've managed to finish off a Super Bowl winning season while still decisively remaining the worst team of the Super Bowl era. Hi.
Hi.
He's Kirk Cousins.
I'm Kirk Cousins.
Kirk Cousins is a spokesman for Holland Hospital. It's 2021. There's a COVID vaccine. People hope that star players like Kirk Cousins will set a good example by taking the COVID vaccine. Kirk Cousins will not take the COVID vaccine. Kirk Cousins is no longer a spokesman for Holland Hospital. He plays all the hits. It's a private matter. I am doing my own research. We've heard this from lots of people, but Cousins is different. Unlike most of those others, I don't get the impression that he thinks he's smarter than everybody. If he really did care about sounding smarter than everybody, then he wouldn't share his idea for building himself a special magneto prison to protect his teammates from his terrifying superpower of being more susceptible to COVID. During training camp, he's designated as a high-risk close contact, which results in him missing practices. Coach Zimmer is already pretty fed up with his quarterback's refusal of the gift of modern medicine. The Vikings have the NFL's lowest vaccination rate, which might not be the case had the team's field general not demonstrated proof of concept. But hey, listen, Justin Jefferson went and got the vaccine as soon as it was made available. Not only that, but after the season, he's going to work with the CDC to serve as a spokesman and encourage people who are on the fence to get vaccinated. Maybe for Cousins, the season Jefferson is about to turn in will serve as proof that the vaccine does not make your arms fall off.
With another 7 games clearing 100 yards in 2021, Jefferson cobbles together a 1,600-yard sophomore season, propelling him up beyond 3,000 career receiving yards, easily the most ever and over 500 yards and 20% more than any other Super Bowl-era player outside of Moss and Beckham. He'll also make it crystal clear late in a Week 11 showdown with the hated Packers how he can be Kirk Cousins' best friend when he's in trouble, about to get blasted on a huge third down by a free blitzer while trailing in the waning minutes. Under heavy duress, Cousins can simply loft the ball toward Jefferson and allow him to gracefully contort his body, haul in the pass, and score the go-ahead touchdown.
Jefferson has been cementing his status as one of the very most exciting players in football. We have got to see this guy in the postseason, and entering Week 17 of the 21 season, we have got a chance. A minor miracle, considering COVID has spent so much of the season blowing holes in the Vikings' depth chart. For this week's Sunday Night Football game, the Vikings head to Green Bay. The playoff picture has only become more clear since it was laid out in this morning's Star Tribune. The Niners and Eagles won today, meaning they'll have to beat the Packers tonight to stay alive. Unfortunately, Kirk Cousins is unable to shake his reputation as a quarterback who vanishes in primetime, high-visibility games. He completely disappears from this game because he has COVID. Thankfully, he only has mild symptoms and will ultimately be fine. Of course, he could have come down with COVID even if he had gotten the shot, but he would have had much better odds of avoiding this outcome, one he'd previously thought of as his worst nightmare. Myths are an essential and beautiful component of the human experience. All this, if nothing else, has been a celebration of that. But myths do not offer actionable information. They are just for fun. A 37-10 Packers clobbering of a Sean Mannion-led Vikings squad is the loss that just about does in Mike Zimmer. He's fired at season's end, capping an 8-year run in which he won the third most games of any Vikings coach, behind only Bud Grant and Dennis Green. But an astonishing 56-year run, a run completely unique to the Vikings, is now in jeopardy. They've never once chained 3 losing seasons together within the Super Bowl era. Even 2 straight has been extremely rare until recently. It happened at the dawn of this era when Bud Grant took over for Norm Van Brocklin, then again in the 80s when Grant declared an emergency unretirement to clean up the mess left by Les Steckel, then in the aughts when Mike Tice took over for Dennis Green and managed to pull him out of the skid. Despite being dealt a bad hand, Leslie Frazier did manage to notch one winning season in the middle of what otherwise would have been a losing streak of 5. Now, after finishing 7-9 and 8-9, they're on the precipice again. Is it finally over? Is the NFL's one and only ship that never sinks finally gonna sink? Congratulations to the Los Angeles Rams, winners of Super Bowl 56. This is their second Super Bowl win.
Hired in 2022 to replace Zimmer as the 10th head coach in franchise history is the man who just coordinated the Super Bowl winning Rams offense, Kevin O'Connell. In addition to reuniting with Cousins, his old pupil in Washington, O'Connell also has at his disposal the Dalvin Cook-led ground game. And while Cook's first 2 years in the NFL were plagued by injury, across his 4 full seasons in Minnesota, perhaps no skill position player in the league aside from Derrick Henry produced at his level. And then of course there's all reliable Justin Jefferson, who in his third season cracks the century mark in 10 games, boosting his career total to 24 such outbursts, which is 26% more than anyone else has ever had through season 3. In another year of moving on up, Jefferson tops 1,400 receiving yards with 4 games to spare, now 3 for 3 clearing that mark to start his time in the NFL when no one but Moss has done so even twice by this point. He'll finish the 2022 season soaring past 1,800, launching him above 4,800 for his career, well over 600 yards more than anyone else. While there were a couple extra games available to him after the 2021 schedule expansion that weren't to most other players, that only accounts for a small fraction of this massive cushion. And a key luxury of having Jefferson on your team is his proven ability this season to serve as a downfield outlet that, even if blanketed, has a real chance to come down with the ball if it's thrown anywhere in his zip code. Like on this third down against the Cardinals, it doesn't matter that Jefferson's got zero airspace from the corner. He finds a way to come through with a game-changing 29-yard conversion that sets up a go-ahead touchdown and a lead they will never relinquish. Bill Belichick, known for neutralizing the opponent's best player, gets stung in the fourth quarter of a tie game when Cousins feels the pass rush converging, heaves the ball toward a double-covered Jefferson, and gets rewarded with an explosive play that sets up what is ultimately the game-winning score. A couple weeks later in Detroit, with pressure up the gut, Cousins gives his top weapon a chance, and a beautiful adjustment results in another big gainer. And on a 4th and 18 in Buffalo with under 2 minutes left in regulation, he's responsible for what has to be the consensus play of the 2022 NFL season and as breathtaking a reception as you will ever see when his outstretched right arm utilizes every last millimeter of his catch radius to just barely get one hand on the ball and, despite the absence of a secondary appendage at his disposal, never for an instant loses control or allows it to graze the turf amid the tightly contested coverage and 2 hands of Cam Lewis trying in vain all throughout to jar it loose.
That last one there is in the running for the title of very greatest catch I have ever seen. That Week 15 game against the Colts we talked about, the one in which they were buried 33-0 at halftime and rose from the dead to win in overtime, is in the running for the very greatest comeback I have ever seen. This 2022 Vikings season is in the running for very greatest overperformance I have ever seen. They finished this season 13-4, with those 13 wins representing a tie for the second most this franchise has ever won. That 2022 point differential we harped on way back when, well, Alex and I spent last December and January sadistically hoping the Vikings would somehow find a way to keep their point differential below 0 throughout the entire season, and they delivered. They finished with a point differential of -3. The Vikings are therefore a football team that went 13-4 while allowing more points than they scored. Huge outlier, any way you slice it. In terms of what they put on the scoreboard, they're by far the worst team ever to win at least 75% of their games, and they're by far the best team ever to be outscored.
In allowing a few points more than they scored, their Pythagorean win total, an expectation derived from a formula based on points scored and points allowed, would have been a little under 8.5 in a 17-game season. So in actually winning 13 games, they beat the forecast by over 4.5 wins. 57% of the dots here reside between -1 and +1, meaning teams generally come within one full win of what Pythagoras would have projected. A bunch of years, no one in the entire league overperforms expectations by even 2 wins. But when it comes to the 2022 Vikings and their victory surplus, they exist in their own stratosphere. No other team has ever had a season coming within a half win of them, and outside of a couple Colts squads in 1992 and 2012, no one else in the Super Bowl era has even come within a full win of their level of overachievement.
This provides football fans a funny mirror. Some see a scrappy team that played to the score, always stayed in the fight, and found the resolve to win close games. Others see a fraudulent also-ran that just happened to luck into 13 wins on account of an absurdly lucky point distribution. My view is that, of course, wins are the only thing that intrinsically matter. Other numbers like point differential are helpful guideposts that can tell you a lot of things, including how likely they might be to win in the future. But this is a legitimate 13-win team. Every 13-win team is a legitimate 13-win team because they won 13 games. Now, would I put money on them? Nope.
While the Vikings somehow scratched out 13 wins, they're facing a Giants team that won just 2 of their final 8 games, putting them in the same company as the Houston Texans, who have earned the 2nd pick in the NFL draft. And the game couldn't start out better for Kirk Cousins and the Vikings. He completes each of his first 7 passes. 4 to Jefferson on an opening drive touchdown. He finishes himself on a sneak. Giants quarterback Daniel Jones uses his arm and legs to crisply move New York 57 yards in 4 plays, and tailback Saquon Barkley squeezes through Minnesota's defense in tight confines and comes out the other side to tie the game. When the Vikings decide to turn Jefferson into a passer, they go 3 and out to hand Jones and company the ball, who again promptly slice through coordinator Ed Donatell's defense with ease, punctuated by a 14-yard Isaiah Hodgins scoring grab. In the second quarter, the Giants take their time, piecing together the NFL's first 20-play postseason drive in 15 years, though they only get 3 out of it. So when 2 long catches by tight end TJ Hawkinson set up a Cousins 9-yard touchdown pass to KJ Osborne, the Vikings are only down 3 at the half despite mostly lackluster play. But Minnesota's defense continues to allow Jones to look like a world beater, with his first 3 passes of the second half going for 66 yards to reach the red zone, where the Vikings D bites hard on a play fake to hand Jones another easy touchdown pass. Cousins does his best to overcome his team's porous defense by leading a long drive he caps with a short scoring toss to again pull within 3, and they appear on the verge of taking the lead with a 4th down conversion inside New York's 15, only to be negated by a false start that instead forces a game-tying field goal early in the 4th. Jones leads another Giants trip into the red zone, where he similarly converts a 4th down with a sneak, only this one counts, and it leads to a Saquon Barkley go-ahead touchdown. The teams then trade punts, with the Vikings getting the ball back needing to drive 88 yards in just under 3 minutes. With no timeouts left, this is their last real chance. After picking up a couple firsts, they face a 3rd and 8 near midfield. Osborne runs a crosser against man-to-man defense and gets a step on his. Cousins looks his way for what should be an easy conversion, but doesn't place the ball far enough in front of Osborne, which allows it to be broken up. 4th down. The plug will be pulled on the Vikings' fairy tale season unless someone makes a big play right now. Everyone in the world, especially the Giants' defense, expects that someone to be Justin Jefferson. Cousins' pocket quickly collapses, with Dexter Lawrence bearing down on him. Looking to avoid a sack at all costs, Cousins could choose to blindly heave the ball in the general vicinity of his all-world wide receiver. It's not an overly enticing option because New York's bracketing Jefferson on either side with a safety over the top, though we have seen time and again this season his ability to overcome tight coverage from multiple defenders to come down with the football. And if he were to do so again, it would move the chains. But Jefferson's had minimal opportunities to make an impact of late, with just a couple short catches going back over 3 quarters, and there's no real window there to throw anything other than a jump ball. And so Cousins continues to be deterred by the Giants' coverage being drawn to Jefferson like moths to a flame, and instead checks the ball down to Hawkinson, a good 6 yards shy of the sticks, considering that to be the lesser of the 2 evils his poor protection has foisted upon him. This would be fine were it an early down, but on 4th, the calculus is different. They're 100% reliant on Hawkinson breaking a tackle to keep their season alive, and he is unable to do so. Ball game. Their 13-win Fool's Gold season ends with Justin Jefferson having amassed just 10 receiving yards across its final 50 minutes.
Cousins will later explain this evening that he knew he was about to be sacked unless he made a throw, any throw, right there and then. He didn't choke. He didn't panic. He made a reasonable call, conceivably even the right call, one that, if you ran it back 10 times, would probably pay off once or twice. But unlike his other potential targets on the field, Jefferson is sitting right there, right in the middle of his field of view. If Cousins leads him down the sideline, it looks as though the throw is there. But that's only what we see. This is what he sees. Remember after the Minneapolis Miracle when Stephon Diggs yelled out a "damn, that shit felt good" on national TV? That did not at all sound like a response from your typical third-year player. It sounded like the catharsis experienced by a man who had absorbed all of this, all of these years. Men like him and Kirk Cousins may not be able to identify all these landmarks. They might not be able to trace the contours of this terrifying cliff face that looms over them every single game, every single year. They might not be able to do what many Vikings fans can, and identify every last detail of this skyline. The Blair Walsh miss from 27 yards, the Favre interception, the 41 points the Giants dumped on him unanswered, the Gary Anderson miss, the knee a few minutes later, the 22-yard gallop from old Cowboys running back Herschel Walker, the 9-carry, 29-yard performance from expensive Vikings running back Herschel Walker, the drop at the end of the 1987 NFC Championship game, the Hail Mary. But they do feel them. When you row, you don't face your destination. It's much more efficient and in line with human anatomy to sit the other way, pulling while facing backwards, staring back at where you came from. It's how the Norse Vikings did it. It's how just about everybody did it. Kirk Cousins, despite memorably putting his fate in the hands of the Lord, does not sail. He is the hardest rower there is with the most perfect form you can ask for, the poster boy of a game optimized to its limits. He dedicates nearly every facet of his life to this game, searching for every edge he can find. He doesn't eat potatoes. He doesn't eat eggs. He doesn't eat tomatoes. He doesn't even eat green beans, because tests have determined that his particular anatomy must expend just a little bit more energy to process green beans that could instead be directed toward football. Cousins is carrying a torch that was lit by Joe Kapp. These two are perhaps the two most different men who have ever picked up a football. Kapp's mechanics were a catastrophe. Not sure whether he smoked, but half his teammates did, so he may as well have secondhand. He drank. One night after a loss that knocked him out of playoff contention, he grabbed a handle of tequila and commiserated with linebacker Lonnie Warwick. Kapp and Warwick drank, and they kept drinking, and eventually they started arguing over whose fault it was that they lost. Kapp insisted, "It's all my fault." Warwick said, "No, it's my fault." It escalated. Warwick shouted at Kapp, quote, "Listen, you crazy Mexican, we lost the game, not you." They soon took it outside to settle which of them got to take the blame. For 5 entire minutes, they just beat the shit out of each other until teammates finally found him and pulled him away. The next morning, they made up. They looked like hell. One of Kapp's eyes was completely swollen shut. Reasoning that they'd probably better get out in front of the story, they walked into Bud Grant's office and owned up to the whole thing. He didn't yell or suspend him or fine him or discipline them at all. He just shook his head and said, "Guys, just don't do that again." Soon after, Grant and Kapp and Warwick went to the Super Bowl together. It's where the winds took them. Maybe the winds have died down. Maybe they've been walled off and optimized away. Maybe that just doesn't work anymore. Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs. Winners of Super Bowl 57. This is their third Super Bowl win. I lied. I told you it would take us about 7 hours to answer the question, who are the Minnesota Vikings? It took, I think, about 9, maybe more. Even then, there were a lot of incredible stories and personalities and odysseys we did not even get a chance to get to. Which speaks to our answer. The Minnesota Vikings are the great storytellers of football. Their stories are often best told through words, but of course they're told through numbers as well. Every other fan base is familiar with the concept of lean years. Not just one bad year, but a protracted institutional nosedive that sends fans into every season expecting to lose. For our purposes, let's define this as, you guessed it, at least 3 consecutive losing seasons, an entire junior high's worth at minimum. Within the Super Bowl era, the Falcons have endured 6 such periods, more than any other team. The Lions, Cardinals, Saints, and Bears have 5. The Bucks have 4, with one of those lasting 14 miserable years. The Niners, Browns, Bengals, Bills, Commanders, and Eagles also have 4. The Jets, Jags, Giants, Titans, Panthers, Seahawks, Raiders, and Dolphins have 3. The NFL's newest franchise, the Texans, has still found time for 2. We've also seen 2 from the Chargers, Rams, Colts, Cowboys, Chiefs, Broncos, Packers, and Patriots. The Ravens, who have had just about the best opening quarter century you could possibly hope to have, still started out with 1 when they began playing in '96. The Steelers, the model of decade in, decade out consistency, the franchise that never ever seems to go away, nonetheless entered the Super Bowl era with a long 6-year skid. The Vikings have zero 3-season losing streaks. There have been a few close calls, but they turn it around just in time, every time. A team with no Super Bowl victories, a team that has not even appeared in any of the last 46 Super Bowls, is the most consistent winner of the Super Bowl era.
Without a doubt, the Minnesota Vikings are, by far, the best team in NFL history at not being bad. Let's marinate a bit more on that element. In addition to never having 3 straight losing seasons, the Super Bowl era Vikings had just one horrendous year, 1984, in what was clearly an outlier season under Les Steckel. But outside of that lone exception, the most by which they ever got outscored in a Super Bowl era season was 109 points. A second worst season that mild is pretty incomprehensible. Outside of the Panthers, who didn't even exist until 30 years into this sample, the only other teams with fewer than 4 seasons getting outscored by at least 110 points are the Packers and Steelers, both of whom won at least 4 Lombardi trophies. And yet despite just one such putrid season as of 2023, the Vikings won 0. In this time, they managed a cumulative point differential of nearly plus 1,800. Every team to ever surpass even plus 1,500 has at least 3 rings, except for the Vikes, who have 0. Same story with playoff seasons. They qualified for postseason play in 31 of these first 57 years. Every other team with at least 27 trips to the playoffs capped at least 5 of them as the last team standing, except for the Vikings, who did so in 0. We already know the first 57 years of the Super Bowl era saw them post a win differential over plus 100. No other team without a title was better than minus 25.
God, look at that. Look at it. They're all the same in the respect that they haven't won a Super Bowl, but the Minnesota Vikings have been sorted. They've been placed, or have placed themselves, in a completely different category. The win differential gap between the Panthers, the second best team of this set, and the Lions, the worst team, is 127 games. The gap between the Panthers and Vikings, meanwhile, is 133 games. So of these 12 zero championship franchises, the gap between number 1 and number 2 is greater than the gap between number 2 and number 12. From here, you can appreciate the gravity of these numbers. You can see what they mean. From here, you can see how they feel. They are alone. They aren't just the best of a tough luck bunch. They aren't a little off. They aren't a merely noticeable statistical deviation. They are explorers. They're fated to go on without a Super Bowl like all these others, but it's a fate they simply refuse to accept. This is one more commonality between those Minnesota Vikings and their historical namesake. They keep landing on your shores. They are inevitable. They never stop coming. On March 11th, 2023, during the production of this series, Bud Grant passed away peacefully at the age of 95. For the first time, the Vikings will have to march toward the Super Bowl without his presence. Bud had held a team office for many decades after his retirement, and it's been theorized that his influence, spoken or unspoken, has inspired this perpetual consistency. Some might even argue that this approach of being relentlessly good prevents them from being great. That, for one, it zeroes out any possibility of acquiring one of the top overall draft picks that quite often catapult a franchise to greatness. That this way of doing things is simply outmoded. That the principles that Bud Grant's Vikings rode to 4 Super Bowls would never work today. You can't put undersized defensive linemen on the interior. You can't start a quarterback who throws a football like he's giving a high five. You can't expect players to shiver on the sideline without heaters anymore. You can't clock out at 5 or 6. Everything is too optimized now. Every last edge must be found. I think this is probably right. However, in December of 2022, in one of his very last media appearances, Bud Grant spoke with K-Fan radio host Dan Barrero. They talked about the 2022 Vikings, the teams he coached in the 60s and 70s, the Super Bowl losses that sounded like they bothered him even less than ever. And at one point, A 95-year-old Bud Grant said one of the most simple yet profound things I have ever heard someone say about football.
Football is the only game played without a round ball. I mean, baseball's got a round ball, basketball's a round ball. You can look at bowling or anything got a round ball except the football. Football's an oblong shape. You know why? Because it takes bad bounces and good bounces. So you got to live with the bounce of the ball. And there's a lot of, you can control the things you can control and forget the things you can't control.
The American football used to be a lot rounder and tougher to throw. As soon as they tapered it and made it more aerodynamic at the ends and narrower and easier to grip in the middle, the sport of football hurtled into the future. The things that can be done with it now, especially after decades of study, are truly astonishing. Even in the last 5 years, the advances in the passing game have been profound. This shape is the shape that allows for 65-yard throws. It's the shape that allows the ball's carrier to cradle it perfectly in his elbow and avoid catastrophe. And yet, as Bud said, it's this ball's very same shape, its very same quality that culminates in absolute chaos the second it hits the deck. It's pointed at both sides. It is impossible to know how it's going to strike the ground, where it'll bounce, who will recover it. The offense gets it back about half the time, suggesting it is, in aggregate, a coin flip, a thing that can destroy every carefully optimized feat of engineering that led to that moment. There is still magic here. This magic should by all rights have been stamped out a long time ago. This is how we know neither the past nor the present can ever guarantee the future. This magic has not favored these Vikings, not yet, but it's still out there, waiting for them. It was one final poetic line offered by Bud Grant, his final contribution to a story unlike any story any other team has ever told. The Vikings will win a Super Bowl one day, and it will be the most necessary and cathartic Super Bowl victory of all time. But any team can win a Super Bowl. Most teams have. Only one team can call themselves the Minnesota Vikings, the carvers of the runes, the great American storytellers.